I was still holding the grocery bags when my father slammed the stack of bills against my chest so hard the paper cut the skin. "Since you're the only one in this house who actually works," he growled, "you can start paying what you use." The living room went dead silent. My mother didn't look up from the couch. She just crossed her arms like she'd been waiting for this moment. And before I could even breathe, my father pushed again, louder this time. "You wanna act grown? Pay your damn share." Except it wasn't my share, and it wasn't the first time they'd buried me under their mess. But that night, something was different, because I had just found something they never expected me to see. And suddenly their anger made a dangerous kind of sense. If you've ever been blamed for problems you didn't create, stay with me. This story might feel a little too familiar, and if you want more family stories like this one, I'd really appreciate a quick subscribe. It truly helps. My name is Jordan Hale. I'm 24, and I grew up in a small, weather-beaten house on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, the kind of place where neighbors keep to themselves, and people think every family argument is just stress. From the outside, my family looked normal enough. My dad worked at a shipping yard, my mom bounced between part-time jobs, and my younger brother Tyler lived like the world owed him comfort. I was the reliable one, the straight A student, the one with a full-time job the minute I turned 18, and slowly, without me noticing, that reliability became a leash. It started with little things. "Jordan, cover the water bill," or "You're the one using the internet the most, right?" Then it became, "We put your name on the electric account since your credit's better," followed by, "Sign this for your dad, it's just a form." I thought helping was what good children did. I thought families shared burdens. I didn't know I was becoming the family's financial spine, the only one holding everything up. But the night my father shoved those bills into my hands, that was the night I realized two things. One, none of those accounts were mine, and two, they weren't asking me to help. They were preparing to blame me. At first, I told myself it was just another rough night. Families fight, parents get overwhelmed. Maybe Dad didn't mean to shove the bills at me hard enough to leave a mark. Maybe Mom's silence wasn't agreement. Maybe she was just tired. That's what I told myself as I put the groceries away with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. But the next morning, the house felt different. Too quiet. Too watchful. Like a storm that hadn't decided where to break. Dad didn't say good morning. Mom didn't ask if I was headed to work. They just sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the bills spread out like broken glass between them. And every time I walked by, I felt their eyes on me, not with concern, but calculation. That was the first small ripple. The next came a week later. I got a call from the electric company asking for Jordan Hale, primary account holder. My stomach tightened. I had never opened an electric account in my life. When I confronted my parents that evening, Dad didn't even look up from the TV. "Relax," he muttered. "It's easier to get approved under your name. Your credit is clean." Clean. Like that was some kind of flaw he needed to fix. Mom chimed in, her voice sugary but sharp. "You're young, honey. It won't matter. We're family." That word, family, felt like a rope tightening around my ribs. The tension kept building, quiet but relentless. Little bills became big ones. My name appeared on envelopes I didn't recognize. Every conversation in the house curved back to money, and somehow, always, to me. "You're the responsible one," Mom would say. "You make the most," Dad would add. "You owe the house something. You're lucky we raised you. You're lucky we kept things together after everything." Lucky, as if I had won something. By the third week, it wasn't ripples. It was waves. I came home from work one night to find Tyler on the couch, laughing with friends, the TV blaring, lights blazing in every room, pizza boxes stacked like monuments to his laziness. When I mentioned the rising utility bills, he smirked. "Not my problem. You're the adult around here." The words hit harder than they should have, because they weren't wrong, not in the way he meant. Somewhere along the line, while I was busy being the good kid, I'd become the only adult in a house full of people who refused to grow up. The escalation kept tightening its grip. Then came the moment that cracked something inside me. One evening, I saw Mom hiding something under a pile of magazines. When she left the room, curiosity gnawed at me. I lifted the papers and froze. A credit card bill, thousands of dollars, all charged in the last 2 months, all under my name. I felt the room tilt, like the floor had dropped and I was falling through years of excuses, years of guilt, years of being told I owed them everything. When Mom returned and saw the paper in my hand, she didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed. "You weren't supposed to see that," she snapped, snatching it away. "It's temporary. We needed help. You'll pay it off eventually." Eventually. Like this was already a done deal. Like my future belonged to her. The anger didn't explode yet. No, it simmered, hot and steady, like the burn of a stove you forget your hand is on. But the explosion came 3 nights later. Dad barged into my room without knocking, waving another bill, my bill, over his head. "You're responsible for this," he shouted. "Don't you dare walk out of this house thinking you're better than the people who raised you." My vision tunneled. My pulse roared in my ears. The last thin thread of denial snapped. This wasn't stress. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't family helping family. This was betrayal, calculated, convenient, and I was the one they planned to pin everything on. The storm finally broke, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who flinched. The night Dad stormed into my room, something in the house shifted. Not physically, but atmospherically, like the air itself understood a line had been crossed. After he slammed the door behind him, I sat there in the dim light of my desk lamp, staring at the bill he'd thrown at me. My name sat bold at the top, like a brand burned into my skin. I hadn't opened that account. I hadn't spent a dime of it. But they had no hesitation blaming me as if the debt crawled out of my pocket and onto the paper by itself. I remember thinking, if this is what it looks like on the surface, what's underneath? And once a thought like that hits, it doesn't leave you alone. The next morning, I waited until both of them left for work. The house, usually loud with TV noise or Tyler's shouting, felt unnervingly hollow. I walked to the dining table, the battlefield of unopened mail, and pulled every envelope with my name on it, electric bill, internet, furniture financing, a cell phone plan I didn't own. My pulse quickened, my vision sharpened. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, as if it carried not just debt but truth. Then I saw it, a thick envelope stamped "Final Notice." My throat tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a credit account I'd never heard of, 2 missed payments, penalties stacking like bricks forming my future prison. The charges included a new gaming console, designer sneakers, restaurant bills that read like a tour guide of places Tyler liked to brag about. They hadn't just used my name. They had built their comfortable life on it. I felt the walls close in. The ceiling seemed lower. My heart thudded like it wanted to escape my chest. I thought of every time Dad said, "We're doing our best." Every time Mom said, "You'll understand when you're older." Every time they insisted we were a team, when really, I was the engine and they were the passengers shouting directions. I gathered every envelope, stuffed them into my backpack, and walked out the door. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I needed truth before truth buried me alive. I went to the library. Quiet, neutral ground. My hands shook as I logged into my credit report. I entered my information and waited, watching the little spinning circle load like it was deciding my fate. And then the list appeared. Lines, dozens of them, accounts I didn't open, balances I never saw, payments I never missed because I never knew they existed. It felt like being punched repeatedly while forced to stay standing. The betrayal wasn't a single event, it was a pattern, a system, a quiet decision they must have made together. Jordan will handle it. Jordan always handles it. Jordan won't question us. Jordan owes us. I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to stop the burning, but it wasn't sadness, it was clarity, brutal, unfiltered clarity. When I left the library, the sun was setting. The cold Cleveland wind hit my face like a slap, waking me further. My phone buzzed. It was Mom. "Pick up milk on your way home." Just that, like I was an errand boy, like I wasn't drowning under the weight of debts they created with my name and my future. I didn't reply. That night, when I returned home, the lights were blazing in every room again. Tyler was sprawled across the couch, eating food delivered to the door. Again. Something else I now suspected was under my name. Mom was folding laundry with the self-satisfied calm of someone whose world was intact. Dad was drinking, feet up, remote in hand. None of them looked at me. Not in guilt, not in fear, not even in acknowledgement. Because in their minds, this was normal. This was my job. This was the role I was born into. I stood in the doorway, watching them. The weight of everything in my backpack pulled on my shoulder like a physical manifestation of the truth. I wasn't part of this family. I was a utility, a name with good credit, a signature that could be forged, a walking, breathing safety net. And suddenly, so suddenly it scared me, I knew I couldn't stay. I walked to my room quietly, closed the door, and began folding clothes into a duffel bag. No dramatic shouting, no tears. Just a cold, determined calm spreading through me like a tide. I packed shirts, jeans, important documents, and the childhood photo of all four of us on a beach. I stared at that picture longer than I should have. It was from another lifetime. A lifetime where I believed my parents would protect me. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. "Bring the electric bill when you get home tomorrow. We need you to make the payment." They didn't know it yet. But tomorrow, I wouldn't be home. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen if I left. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed. I didn't leave the next morning. I left that night. I waited until the house settled into its usual rhythm, Dad's television humming through the walls, Mom moving between the kitchen and laundry room, Tyler shouting at his friends online, the domestic soundtrack of a home I no longer belonged to. I zipped my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped into the hallway. For a moment, I hesitated. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew once I took this step, I wasn't coming back as the same version of Jordan they depended on, manipulated, and leaned on like a crutch. I wasn't going to be the obedient child whose silence kept their world intact. I took a breath, walked to the front door, and that's when I heard the voice that stopped me cold. "Where do you think you're going?" Dad stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, face flushed from cheap whiskey. His gaze slid to the duffel bag, and something sharp flickered in his eyes. "You running off because of a few bills?" he scoffed. "Grow up." Mom appeared behind him, her arms wrapped around her chest like she was cold, or guilty, but not guilty enough to admit anything. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice yet. Dad walked closer, jabbing a finger at my bag. "Put that down. We're not done discussing the finances." The word finances felt like poison in my ears. "That's the point," I finally said, my voice steady in a way that startled even me. "It's always about money, bills, debts, my name on things I never opened." Mom straightened. "What are you talking about?" I dropped the stack of final notices, credit statements, and overdue bills onto the table. They fanned out like evidence in a crime drama. Dad's face went blank, then angry, then blank again. Mom stepped closer, flipping through the papers with trembling fingers. "Jordan, you weren't supposed to see these yet." That word, yet, hit me like a fist. So they knew. They knew the accounts were in my name. They knew the debt wasn't mine. They knew I had been carrying the house on my back, and they planned to keep it going until I broke. The room felt too small, the air too tight. "You did this behind my back," I said. "You used my credit. You signed my name." Dad exhaled sharply, annoyed, not ashamed. "We're your parents. We needed help. That's what families do." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Families talk. Families ask. Families don't steal their child's future just because it's convenient." Tyler wandered into the doorway, half asleep. "What's going on?" Dad snapped. "Go back to your room." But he didn't. He looked at the papers, glanced at me, then quickly looked away, like even he knew there was no defense. Mom pressed a hand to her forehead. "Jordan, honey, you're overreacting. We didn't have a choice." "You had 1,000 choices," I said. "You just didn't like any of them." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your tone." "I've been watching my tone my whole life," I shot back. "And where did it get me? A ruined credit score? Thousands of dollars of debt I didn't cause? A house where I'm treated like a walking paycheck?" Silence. Heavy. Tense. Charged like a wire ready to snap. Dad leaned closer, his voice low. "You're not walking out that door until we figure this out." "I already figured it out," I said. Then I stepped backward and opened the door. "Jordan!" Mom called, something desperate in her voice for the first time. "Where will you go?" I paused, just long enough to let the truth land. "Somewhere I'm not used," I said. "Somewhere I'm not the only adult in the house." Dad cursed under his breath. Mom whispered my name like a plea. Tyler stood frozen, wide-eyed, finally seeing the cracks he'd ignored for years, but I didn't turn around. I walked out into the cold night, the wind slapping my face awake, the darkness stretching ahead like a dare. Every step away from that house felt like reclaiming oxygen. I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. I didn't know how long it would take to untangle the financial mess they made. I didn't know how hard the road back would be, but I knew this. If I stayed, they'd drown me. If I left, I had a fighting chance, and so I kept walking, into the dark, into the unknown, into my own life. I crashed on my friend Maya's couch. Her tiny apartment smelled like lavender candles and old textbooks, a world away from the tension-soaked air I'd been breathing my whole life. She didn't ask questions when she opened the door and saw the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. She just said, "You finally did it," and pulled me inside. But once the adrenaline faded, reality hit me with a force I wasn't ready for. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the city lights slicing through the blinds, my mind racing with everything that could go wrong. What if my parents kept using my name? What if the debt collectors came after me? What if my credit was ruined forever? The fear sat heavy on my chest like a weight I'd carried so long, I didn't realize how much it hurt until I finally set it down. The next morning, I made coffee with shaking hands and opened my laptop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking up homework assignments or job listings. I was looking up how to save myself. I pulled my credit report again, forced myself to read every painful line. Each fraudulent account felt like another betrayal carved into the timeline of my life. But instead of crying this time, something sharper rose in me. Resolve. I started a list. Account numbers, dates opened, balances, addresses. Maya watched from the kitchen, her expression turning from sympathy to anger. "They did this to you," she said quietly. The words felt brutal and true. By noon, we were sitting in a free legal clinic across town, fluorescent lights humming above us. A woman named Carla called my name. She looked over the stack of papers in silence, her brow tightening with every page. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "Jordan, this isn't just irresponsible parenting. This is identity theft." The phrase hit me like cold water. Identity theft. My own parents. She continued, explaining dispute procedures, fraud alerts, documentation, next steps. I wrote everything down, my hand cramping, my pulse thudding. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Against my parents?" "Against the people who stole from you," she corrected gently. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready for that cliff yet, but I took every paper she gave me, every instruction, every lifeline. Back at Maya's, I spent the evening on the phone with banks and companies, repeating the same sentence until it became muscle memory. "I did not open this account. I need to report fraud." Some calls went smoothly, others left me drained and shaking. But each one felt like reclaiming an inch of ground I didn't know I'd lost. Days passed like that, long, exhausting, heavy, but slowly, pieces of my life began clicking back into place. Fraud alerts were added, accounts were frozen, investigations opened, a path forward, faint but real, formed under my feet. And then another shift happened, subtle, unexpected. I started to breathe again, not the shallow, careful breathing I'd perfected in my parents' house, but real breath, the kind that fills your lungs and doesn't ask permission. One night, as I sat on Maya's fire escape, watching the orange glow of streetlights, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of going home. I was afraid of ever going back. Because once you see the truth, once you see who people are when it costs them nothing to use you, you don't unsee it. And a small, fierce thought settled into my bones. They expected me to break. Instead, I was learning how to stand. I didn't wake up one morning magically healed, suddenly wiser, suddenly whole. Life doesn't work like that, and neither does recovery. What really happened was quieter. A series of small choices that slowly stitched me together again. A decision not to answer a call. A decision to file one more dispute. A decision to stay gone, even on the days guilt tried to drag me back. Looking at my life now, I don't feel triumphant the way movies make these stories look. I feel steady, rooted, finally occupying the space that once felt too big for me because I was so busy shrinking myself to fit inside other people's needs. There was no dramatic apology from my parents, no late-night message saying they finally understood. Maybe one day there will be, maybe there won't. That part isn't my story to write. Healing isn't about forcing someone else to become better. It's about refusing to let them keep you small. What I did get was something far more important: clarity. I learned that family can love you and still hurt you. I learned that blood can bind you but shouldn't blind you. I learned that responsibility becomes poison when only one person carries it. And above all, I learned this: sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is step out of a house that claimed to be home. There's one image I keep replaying, a moment I didn't understand until much later. The night I left, as the door closed behind me, the wind hit my face like the world was exhaling with me. Like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to finally choose myself. Maybe that's the real ending. Realizing the world doesn't punish you for walking away. It punishes you for staying someplace that wants to break you. If my story feels familiar, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while everyone else pretends not to notice, I hope you walk away with this reminder. You are allowed to save yourself, even if the people you love are the ones you're saving yourself from. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Truly, stories like this aren't easy to tell, and they aren't easy to hear, but they matter. Because somewhere out there, someone is living this right now and needs to know they're not alone. If this resonated with you, I'd appreciate a gentle like or a subscribe. It helps the channel grow, but more importantly, it helps stories like these reach the people who need them most. And if you're ready for another chapter, another truth, another story that might just mirror a piece of your own life, watch the next video. I'll meet you there.